John Foley and I got together a while back, and he was kind of leading me through his brand and reputation analysis process. And being a smart guy, I said, hey, could you boil that down for 40 minutes and tell a lunch group? And he said, well, as a matter of fact, I actually do that. So John is going to help us all better understand our brands, our reputations, how to use that to deliver growth. He's got a wonderful structured process that he has written about, presented, and consulted on. And we are very lucky to have John Foley, founder and CEO of Level Brand and Reputation Management Firm here. So let's give John a warm welcome.
Thank you. It's a twofer today. I wrote a book in 2006 called Balanced Brand, and my co-author is here today, Julie Kendrick. And that was a surprise. Yay! So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go on a little bit of a roller coaster to start this, and I've got some things that I want to share with you that I think will be useful that you can take back and maybe incorporate into your business right away. But if you will, while you're eating your lunch, keep your arms and legs in. That is a sound of global competition. And what we're finding coming out of this recession is that everybody in this room is probably being asked to do more with fewer resources. How can we compete on a global economy with the issues that we've had in our own economy, and what are we going to do to get to the next level? And the question we've been asking ourselves is, well, what is the next level? The next level is alignment, authenticity, and trust. So out of the ashes of our economy, what we're seeing is new businesses who are emerging, and what they have in common is the businesses that we've seen that are doing really well right now have strong brands and strong reputations. And the businesses whose brands and reputations aren't very strong are floundering and in fact are disappearing. So we took a close look at, well, how does an organization build alignment, authenticity, and trust? And that's what we're going to talk about this afternoon. So let's look at alignment. If you think of your business sometimes, some businesses look like the EU. You've got factions, you've got silos, you've got people within the organization that aren't really pulling together in the same direction. And in the EU, their brand, their common currency is the euro. But when they're going up against competitors that are unified like the United States and China, they have a very, very difficult time economically competing. And so in a business setting, you kind of have to ask yourself, are we more like the EU or are we more like the US and China from a competitive standpoint? We have 5 elements that create alignment. They're values, culture, brand, customer experience, and reputation. I'm going to talk about all 5 elements today. And they're interrelated. They're typically not managed that way, but they in fact are interrelated. So your values inform your culture. And your culture is what allows you to keep a brand promise. And if you keep your brand promise, the client experience or the customer experience is positive and you get a good reputation. And that sounds simple enough. But what we have found is there's more, how that works, there's more to it. There's intent in the alignment and outputs. And that comes from the stakeholders that work with you. So for the last 26 years, we've been working with our clients locally and globally, and we've been trying to understand how values, culture, brand, client experience, and reputation are interrelated and how they work together. And what we do is we talk to our clients and we look at what are their perceptions of their values and culture, and we go through a process where we look at senior management, rank and file. We ask sales what they think, and then we go to the customer and we say, what's been your experience and values, culture, and your client experience with the company? And we come back, and what we have every time is gaps. There's opportunities for alignment. And what happens that's extraordinary is companies go, wow, we had no idea. There's always this kind of holy crap moment where people go, we didn't realize that that's what our clients actually thought, or that's what sales thought versus management. In those gaps is where the alignment opportunities exist. And what we try to do as part of our process is how do you build internal consensus? Everybody in the room has probably had an experience where you go out and you do something and you say, isn't this the greatest idea? And if everybody wasn't in on it, you could walk in with the Holy Grail and they don't like it. It's like, well, it's okay. And so you have to build a consensus around alignment. So if we take those one step at a time, let's start with values. Values are really an interesting part of how they affect brands and reputations. Because if you think of values in our lives as a lens to run our daily lives, let's look at religious values. So spiritually, people have very strong religious values on how they worship and what they believe in. Nationalistically, we have very strong national values that we're willing to die for. And in politics, we have incredibly strong values in terms of how we think we should govern and how we treat each other. When we get to business, it all sorts of kind of comes apart a little bit because you don't have one set of values, you actually have two. You have stated values, and stated values are the things that you put on the wall. So stated values would be the things that you say, here's the things we wrote down that are our values. And then you have operating values, and that's when somebody gets a new job and they take you to lunch and they say, let me tell you how things work around here. In great companies, stated values and operating values are in fact the same. But a lot of times what we find is that's not the case. Here's an example. Here's a company's stated values: people, customer focus, integrity, respect, entrepreneurship. Nice, good values, don't you think? AIG. You know, so they become platitudes. And what we found is that, you can have a bunch of words, but if they're not a lens to run your life each and every day, it don't work. If they're not really, you don't have corporate values per se. The converse of that is William A. Mayo. In 1910, he wrote 3 values. We will put the interests of the patient first. We will collaborate. We will not for profit. They have not changed those 3 values since 1910. It's been an amazing run. They have over 54,000 employees. Now on their internet, they get something like 5 million visits a month to their website, which is more people than they've ever actually taken care of in the history of Mayo Clinic. But they have heritage days, and everyone that works for Mayo Clinic understands those values and adheres to them. You can stop a meeting at Mayo Clinic and say, are we putting the interests of the patient first? It's a legitimate question. It's a lens to do our job each and every day. So when you think about corporate values, you need to really take that piece seriously because it really sets the table for culture. What happens when they're not aligned? When stated in operating values? You get mistrust, you get people who are skeptical of one another, and you get kind of this laissez-faire attitude like, well, nobody seems to care. When the operating values are aligned, you get this sense of camaraderie and a sense of purpose, collaboration, and performance at the highest levels. It really does. We've all seen it. You visit companies and you can tell in about 10 minutes whether their culture is healthy or not because they're spot on and they really seem to know where they're going and they're pulling together. Without shared values, there are no relationships, and without relationships, there is no business. Think about that for a second. We do business with people whose values we share. And if we share people's values, we're willing to build a relationship. But without relationships, there is no business. So ultimately, everyone in this room, and I don't care what your job title is, you're in the relationship business. We're here to build relationships. And yet in business and in marketing in particular, it's ridiculous. The terms we use in marketing for building a relationship is acquisition, penetration, and retention. I don't know about you, but I don't want to be acquired. I certainly don't want to be penetrated, and I don't want to be retained. So we're using a language of business that's kind of a military language to talk about building relationships. We talk about target marketing. If I came up and said, you know what, I've been targeting you for 6 months, you'd run away. You'd say, oh my God, what are you doing? But that becomes the language of business. We're not thinking about shared values. When you think about technology and what Facebook and what social media is doing with shared values, there's more and more ways for people of like-mindedness to connect. We even have the Food Channel, for crying out loud. People are interested in food and they're going to watch the Food Channel. How many people have a brand that's so strong that somebody's willing to tattoo it on their arm? So you get an idea of how powerful these shared values can be in business. So if values are the backbone and the soul of the business, the culture is how do we operate. Everybody wants to do important work. It was interesting, on the way over today, I was listening in public radio, and there's somebody that was writing about important work. It's just a fact of life. It doesn't matter what you do. You want to do important work. We work for money, but we work for other things too, and doing important work is a critical part of that in terms of what we do for our business, and especially the next generation. Most people, if you say, why did you start a business? That the first thing they say is, I was trying to get rich. Well, maybe they were, but usually that's not it. Usually they're trying to make a difference. People want to do important work. And in every business, there's advocates, adversaries, and fence sitters. And not to be religious, but if you think of the 12 apostles, they fit too. So if you think about what your advocates, adversaries, and fence sitters are, advocates are the people you go to get stuff done. These are the people that you go, you know, of course they'll get it done. I ask them every single time. And we just count on them. And we talk about this statistically, employee engagement. Well, that's a number. It isn't an advocate, an adversary, or fence sitter. I can't tell you if you're 0.6 where you fit in the continuum. Adversaries are those dark holes that suck up all of your energy and you wish they'd leave your office and you should throw them out the window. Those are the people who you really know are not getting it done, but they're there day in and day out, and they're really glad to screw up the culture. I mean, they're there to tell everybody just how bad things are. And then fence sitters are the most interesting. Fence sitters are more difficult to identify. Fence sitters tend to be people who are they're looking for which way the wind is blowing. Sometimes fence sitters are just waiting to retire and they're kind of trapped in their job. And they don't have the right job. And they're not bad people, but they're not really productive. What's interesting is that every time there's a major management change in a company, or you go through a merger or an acquisition, all of the advocates become fence sitters. We all kind of fold our arms and we say, I don't know if I'm in or out. I got to see what these people are about. And so many deals you hear deals being announced, and the deal gets done financially, and they say, gee, it just didn't work the way they thought it was supposed to. Because ideally, in advocates, you have the majority, and you've got a few adversaries and fence sitters. Average is less than that. We have fewer advocates, but enough to keep things going in the right direction with your fence sitters. And then when we get to culture clash, like when we've gone through a merger or acquisition, you start to see these things unravel. It's like, well, these two firms didn't really fit together very well. We saw that with the Merrill Lynch, Bank of America. That came apart fairly quickly. Chrysler and Fiat right now is kind of are the Italians and the Americans, do we have the same philosophy? We saw that with Mercedes-Benz when there was that merger. Kmart and Sears. So you see this story played out over and over again, and yet we don't seem to think beyond the deal. The deal still seems to be the paramount part of it. So when you're in transition, this is what the organization looks like. When you're going through a merger or a leadership change, is you have all the fence sitters. And one of the goals, 3M has gotten very good at this. 3M has started to look at culture way before they do a deal, because they've learned after doing lots and lots and lots of mergers that this is what predicates whether they're successful as much as the finances and whether the markets are complementary and the other things, is how do you get the fence sitters back to an advocate position? What are you going to say to them? How are you going to work with them culturally? So once you get culture, now we get to brand. And I like to say we tend to complicate things in the world. In its simplest form, your brand is your promise. What are you promising the market? You can say lots of other things about brand, but a brand promise is paramount to what are we saying. And there's two kinds of brands. There's corporate brands, which is your story and your values and your culture. So 3M or Ford or Apple, their brands don't change much. They're corporate brands over time. We affiliate it with their values and we have stories around it. And so we trust those brands. On the product side, they change all the time because it could be a new iPhone or where Ford comes out with a new product. And so they're always looking at trademarks and features and benefits and they're positioning against the competition. So your corporate brand creates a context, if you will, for the product brand. So when you go to Best Buy and you look on the wall and there's a sea of TVs and they all look the same, and you walk up to one and it's about $300 less than the other flat screens on the wall, and it's, you've never heard of them. It's like, who? You kind of step back and you go, oh, I don't know if I'm going to do that because of the context. We want to be sure that it's a brand that we trust. So sometimes brand drives reputation. Apple's a great example of that. They've put a lot of money in promotion, but it's not always that way. Sometimes reputation drives brand. We'll talk more about that. The question I'd ask all of you if you have a brand is your brand authentic? Levi's, Harley. This is a really interesting story with Dove. Dove did this whole thing about you don't have to be perfect to be beautiful, and it was a great story. And they did really well with it. And I'm going to come back to it, but they had a problem, and I'll show you what the problem was. Sometimes your story gets lost in translation. The other thing we find with our clients is that the customer doesn't understand what you're talking about. It's like when the IT guy comes in your office and they want to explain how that software really works. And after about 15 seconds, you're lost and you glaze over, and they think they're doing a bang-up job. It's like, I have no idea, and by the way, I don't care. And so we have to know what language actually resonates. And there's a vocabulary. If you listen to your customer, they'll give you a vocabulary of language that you can test, that you can use on your website and you can use in sales. So we've got to make sure not only is the story authentic, but it doesn't get lost in translation. Now let's come back to the values and authenticity part. Lever Brothers owns Dove. They also own Axe. They ran these two campaigns at the same time. They're idiots. They did Dove. You don't have to be perfect to be beautiful. And then they have somebody getting in her pants and it says, nice girls turn naughty for Axe. Well, there was this huge backlash because the Dove people, the women said, you tricked me. And they said, well, it's two different brands. And it's like, no, it's one company. You own both companies. You can't have two sets of values. You can have brand attributes, but as a corporate brand, you better have one set of values. Every time you hear the word backlash in the marketplace, remember that what you're talking about is you're out of sync with some stakeholder group's values. And what we hear in the newspapers all the time is, we had no idea. We didn't know. Well, the reason we didn't know is we don't spend any time after the sale figuring out what values I've assigned to your brand or your company. And then companies get into trouble. What do these brands have in common? This is a participation part. Come on, what do they have in common? No? They're not? American-based, what else? They won't go away. Very close. They're kind of in this graveyard of mature brands that we've heard of. I always say to people, we're always measuring awareness in marketing. Awareness is like the worst measure in marketing of all time. I'm aware of Sears. I don't shop there. So what you want to find is, are people willing to buy my product? Are they actually willing to do something? Propensity to buy is a much better measure than awareness. I'm aware of all kinds of stuff. But if they're aware of you and you've gotten this old brand that doesn't work anymore, you're in trouble. You're in a graveyard. It's the worst place to be. So moving on to client experience. I love this slide. How many times have you wanted to do that in a restaurant? I'll just leave them a note. Just leave a note. It's okay. This is how airlines, this is a client experience for the airline. That's what it looks like. It's nothing but annoying, And what's interesting is airlines will compare themselves to each other and say, well, we're better than so-and-so. Well, you know what? That's still really, really, really bad. And I tried to figure it out because, with Delta or Northwest in our market, we have neighbors that work there and they're perfectly nice people. They seem fine. You meet them in the neighborhood and they seem great. And you get to the airport and something happened. Something horrible happened. It's a cultural thing. And it's not pretty. We've all suffered it. Here's another really pretty stupid, easy test. What airline there does the best job with the client experience? Ding, 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 ding. Why? Because they actually care about their employees and they do stuff with their employees. They're very interested in their culture, and it translates to the counter, and it translates to in-flight service. And they're not perfect. They did get in trouble with the FAA a few years ago with some maintenance stuff. They're not perfect, but they're better than other airlines. And the reason is because they're paying attention to their culture. We have a thing we call the unified client experience. Here's a little thing you can do when you get back to your office. Pretend you're your customer and you can pick the time horizon you want. It could be 90 days or 3 years. It doesn't matter. And write out, here's the perfect experience my customer would have had with our company. And then ask your customer, is that true? Or ask them to write the same thing and compare it. Out of that unified client experience, you'll find out fairly quickly what are the expectations and where can you do better. A great example of that was when Schultz left Starbucks. Starbucks decided we can make more money. We don't want to just be in the coffee business. And so instead of just having this client experience of coffee or customer, they started serving McMuffins or something, and it didn't smell like coffee anymore. And their business went in the toilet, and he came back, and he's trying to turn the company around again, and he's trying to build that client experience or customer experience back to what it should be. But it's keeping track of that, and because of this, because they fell down on the customer experience, who picked up the opportunity? McDonald's. McDonald's has done land office coffee business since Starbucks tripped. And they continue to because their prices are a lot cheaper. That's part of it, but their coffee's not all bad either. So if you're not getting the experience you were paying for in the bistro, you're not willing to pay the extra money for the coffee. So the final piece is reputation. And reputation in its simplest form is your company's performance is perceived by a third party. So brand and reputation are two sides of the same coin. They're not managed that way, but they should be. What I mean by that is you have a promise, and then your client or the marketplace or the press decide whether or not you're keeping your promise. Now, there's two ways to know whether you're doing brand work or reputation work. In branding, we control the tools. We have segmentation and we have products. We pick the product and the trademark and the price and how we differentiate in the advertising, website, collateral. We can control all that stuff. In reputation, we can only influence our values, our consistent performance, governance, third-party validation, media relations, employee relations. So all you have to ask yourself is, am I controlling it or am I only influencing it? And you'll know whether you're doing brand work or you're doing reputation work. That's the difference between the two. They're both very powerful, but they work very differently. They're managed differently. Google is an example of reputation driving brand. Google doesn't do a lot of advertising, but through your experience with Google, their brand is driven clearly off of user experience. Mayo Clinic would have done the same thing. What Mayo Clinic will tell you, the reason that Mayo Clinic is advertising now is what Mayo Clinic discovered was it took them 90 years to build their brand. It's not a very efficient way. Typically, Google, you have a lot more experience, but with Mayo and with most companies, just driving your brand off of the client experience is not a very efficient way to build a brand. So how do reputations get built? You become familiar, you believe, and you trust. How come that's not the top? What are we missing? Endorse. I can trust you, but as soon as I say to somebody, you really ought to consider this company, I put my personal prestige and my reputation, my personal reputation on the line, endorsing a company. That's the absolute height of reputation. And as you look, that's not a bell curve. We can go to lose faith and condemn in about 15 seconds, and we see it all the time. How quickly reputations are destroyed. You know, just one thing, Whirlpool with the thing on the politics where they tweeted, and all of a sudden, I know some people at Whirlpool, the backlash from that was phenomenal after the debates. So your company can have one incident, and suddenly you're stuck. And here's the other thing to think about. A modern day president gets 4 to 7 minutes to react to a world event before it's live on CNN. You get 4 to 7 minutes to figure out what your policy is, how the country is going to react. Because of the internet, you do too. Something could happen at Cargill in South America or in China, and because of the internet, it can be on YouTube in no time at all. And the idea that you can have a crisis plan for every eventuality is not true. You have to have values, and you have to build your reputation based on those corporate values. So how do we build a reputation? We form it, we polish it, it becomes stellar. Sometimes it gets tarnished and we have to fix it again. We go back to polishing, or it becomes mud. And these two are interrelated. So validation is what drives reputation. How third parties validate our companies is how we build our reputation. How do we bridge the two? Why is it important to have a strong brand and a strong reputation? And this was the premise of my book. You should all buy it. It's on Google. It's on well, you can get it on Amazon. Just kidding. You're going to get it all for free right here. Here's how it works. If you're well known, if you have a well-known brand, but your reputation is weak, people know you're in trouble of some kind. Usually you're in some kind of crisis. And so strong brand, weak reputation, what happens internally is a lot of the attention goes to that problem, and you're not really functioning the way the company should function. If you're respected, but you're not known, then what happens is that you have difficulty doing business in other fields. Now, you're going to look at this list locally, and you're going to say, why would Cargill be on there or Starkey? When I do this for the conference board in New York, they don't know who Cargill is. It's amazing on the East Coast. You don't have to get very far out of Minnesota before these brands, and Cargill knows that their brand isn't as strong as it would like to be. Starkey, on the other hand, the largest hearing aid company in the world, they'd like to be in the MP3 player business because they know so much about audiology, but they're not able to expand because their brand isn't strong enough to carry them there. So there's inhibitors, but a lot of companies have weak brands and strong reputations. When your brand and reputation are strong, it reduces your cost to go to market. It reduces the amount of marketing dollars you have to put behind a product to make it successful. And in small business, you don't have to be known by the world. You just need to be known by the people you want to do business with. So it's not like you need to be a household name, but you have to build a strong brand in the markets that you're serving. So let's talk about trust.
The biggest thing going on with U.S. consumers is that they want to trust